What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now, Back to the Past. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk a little bit about the Budokai Trilogy before we get to Sparking Zero. In fact, the day this video goes out, I think, depending on which version of Sparking Zero you have, we might be already in it. So the time has come. It's so exciting to get, that Tenkaichi 4 type thing, and I know I've been waiting for it for a while. I know you guys have been waiting for it for a while. So in the quest to get ready for Sparking Zero, I've done 3 individual videos on this channel on Budokai, and I'm eventually going to get the Tenkaichi, going to do Legacy of Goku. Actually got quite a few Dragon Ball videos planned for years to come, but I did play Budokai 1, 2, 3. I have all of them physically. You can watch those individual videos. I kind of want to put them together. New video. I'm not going to just show you those 3 videos. I want to kind of walk you through, my experience playing these games and just how I think they really did evolve over time. And I talk about Budokai 3 kind of starting at the end. Like, Budokai 3 is such a phenomenal game, and I didn't really realize that my memory growing up was really Budokai 1. I remember the story kind of elements, right? Cutscene kind of gameplay. That's what really stuck out to me. I do remember flying, right? Just flying, and there's a lot of empty land, but eventually you'll see like a question mark, you jump in. Those were kind of my main 2, and I guess I also did remember the grid. So going into these 3 games, I gotta be honest, I didn't really know which one was which. It's been decades, maybe not plural, but definitely a decade plus since I've played these games. So I remember kind of the main parts, and I do think those are kind of the main parts. When you think of Budokai 1, you think of like greatness from small beginnings, but you also think of just a rock solid game. The game is fun. The game is not too complicated, and that's one of my main takeaways with Budokai 1 is, if you want these early, the early kind of sagas, arcs, if you want that, this is probably the best way to play it, because when you go to 2 and you go to 3, the way they skip things, like 3 is more like a kind of piecemeal, right? Like you play as like 6, 7 characters, and they'll fill in the story. So you're not going to get the full story from just one. You got to play it through all of them, and they'll have different lengths of time, right? When you go to 2, it's the grid, and you get the arcs, and you get some conversations, but in terms of like legit storytelling, I think it's probably the weakest, right? But they're each trying to do their own thing. So again, like kind of greatness from small beginnings, it is a simple fighting system, but one that I think is really, really good. It's not, you can watch that video, and again, I'll have all 3 linked. I think that first game is a ton of fun to play, and I'm bad at these games, like not necessarily Dragon Ball, but fighting games in general. Now, I don't know if you would compare Dragon Ball to Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter and stuff, but those games I'm terrible at. I feel like, if you get it with Dragon Ball, and there's not too many combinations, but it looks pretty. It back in the day, and back when we all played it, and I keep saying this, right? What we see of Sparking Zero now is what we thought we were seeing back then, especially as it goes. When you get to Budokai 3, you are performing some like pretty okay like combos, and you're smacking people through things, and you're doing some pretty cool moves. There's some like reactionary stuff there, and like that, what we thought of back then is actually Sparking Zero now, with the trees freaking shaking, the ground and just, the particle effects and everything that's going on. That's what we thought we were seeing there back with the Budokai games. But, Budokai 1 doesn't necessarily have a lot of that stuff. I think it is a rock-solid foundation for the actual fighting. And then, again, I really do think it's the best way to play the story. It's meaty enough. It tells it well enough. And, it's very Goku-centric. And I think it's just, in terms of digestibility, and it's the first one, of these, and eventually when we get to Tenkaichi, it's the first one of these 6. It kind of needed to be that way. So, again, like thinking back to it and remembering when I first played it, like I do remember more of the cutscenes and more of like the story elements to it, and that to me is one of the big elements that stands out with 1. Jumping to 2, I remember the grid. I remember the pawn type system. And again, I didn't remember which one of these games was which, right? So I do 1, and I say, okay, I remembered that. I wouldn't be able to tell you it was 1, but I remembered it. Going into 2, it's like, so this is the grid game. And, I think 2 is good. The grid thing is interesting. And I think, it adds a little bit of strategy that's not present. But, I think as I expressed in the video I made on that, you can kind of screw yourself over. I know later later on when you have to fuse, with Goku and Vegeta, if you don't do that right, Majin Buu is just going to walk right over you and actually like eliminate like your entire party. So, the way it's designed, I don't think is like perfect. It's kind of fundamental in its basics where enemies will sometimes move up by one, then move back. Like it's kind of just the same thing. You can trap them pretty easily if you're trying to do stuff like that. But, I think it's got like an interesting feel to it. I think it's got a memorable feel to it, right? Like you play that pawn grid type system and you never really forget it. I don't know if you think that it's good, but you never forget that system. But to be fair, it does tell the story again, but it tells it in a different kind of way. They skip some events to it for sure, but it's just a different and interesting way to tell that story. And then as for gameplay, I just felt better about it. I think this is, you take what you learned in Dragon Ball Budokai 1 and you emphasize it and go forward, in 2. Thinking back, and I played all 3 of these games in 2024, the gameplay kind of speaks to me the least into probably of all like the major features in all 3 of these games. I don't remember too much of it. I remember liking it in some ways more than 1, and I think you can probably say that about the game. I think Budokai 2 in a lot of ways is better than 1, but also worse than 1, and I think that's kind of just where it sits. So then going into 3, by process of elimination, it had to be the one where you're kind of like flying around, right? And I remember playing that with my cousin, growing up, and even as a kid, I think I remember like, oh, it's cool to fly, but there's not a lot to do, is there, right? Like you have the one spot you can kind of like you can grind, you can level up, and that's something that they kind of started to experiment a little bit with, and almost kind of building your character. They started doing that a little bit with Budokai 2. Then with 3, it's more of like an action RPG, right? Like you're putting things into the character level and all that jazz. And 3 is just so good. I really love 3. Now, again, I think in terms of storytelling, it's probably the least unique of any of them, because 1 is more like, cutscene focus and I think skips the least amount. 2 is different, but it's also kind of unique, in terms of how they do it with the grid. 3, again, like you have to play as all of them, so you're kind of getting pieces of it. There's actually at times a lack of voice acting just in general, a lot of reading compared to 2's got a little bit of reading as well, but I think it's got more than any of those, right? So I think in terms of the voice work, it's the least done in Budokai 3. But what I really want to focus on with 3, besides flying around, like I'll always remember flying around, and it's not as deep as you probably would want it to be, but you can still do it. The fighting, the actual gameplay. The gameplay in 3 is unbelievable. Truly, like, I live streamed it. There's a live stream video on this channel, and I also did the whole video retrospective on it. And I was shocked. I was shocked at how good the combat is in 3. They implement dodging type systems, right? Where you kind of like lift your leg up, and being a martial artist, like I love some of that stuff. Just some of the counters, some of the getting behind characters, dodging, like lifting your leg up at the right time to make them miss. So many of those systems, even how they do like key and stuff, they really, I think, like turn the page for the better. I love the combat. I think it's so good. It's deep, but none of these, like I said in the first game, and the second game has it too, they progressively get deeper, but they never get too crazy for somebody like me. Now, maybe, other people might want to get more crazy, and I feel like they probably do. I think Sparking Zero is going to be a little bit more involved than like the Budokai, the trilogy, right? But for someone like me, 3 really is that sweet spot where there's stuff to learn. You learn stuff, and you've been learning as the games went on. Like I was a better fighter in 2 than I was in 1. I was a better fighter in 3 than I was in 2. But they also give you a little bit more. They say, okay, we're going to implement a couple new features that you're going to have to like try it out. You're going to have to experiment with it, or you're going to kind of fail here. And I never felt like the level gap or like a blocking in 3 as I did in 2 and 1. 1 and 2, we'll say it in either direction. 1 and 2 can sometimes just jump up the difficulties. That's another thing. Now that I'm saying it out loud, I remember in 1 and 2, some of these bosses. I mentioned Majin Buu. In 2, some of these bosses are unbelievable, where they jump up in difficulty and they pound the living heck out of you. See, what I really like about the sweet spot of 3 is, number one, I never felt like that. There was a couple times where like certain characters would be more difficult than others, but 1 and 2 felt unfair at times, and also in 3 gave the ability of like grinding more than 1 and 2 did. In fact, I don't even think they did almost at all. 3, you could actively level yourself up. Now, you would have to know. You have to know to level yourself up before you go to like the next story mission. But as long as you do it just a little bit, you're probably going to be fine. Versus in 1 and 2, like I said with 2 with the grid, it's like if you didn't do things almost kind of perfectly how they told you to, you were probably going to get run over. And 1 is way more straightforward. There's really nothing you have to think about other than just, keep learning the combos and hope you get past, this boss fight or, this epic character fight. 3 felt more like, we're still going to give you some of that stuff, but overall, if we feel it's going to be too hard, we're going to let you level up. We're going to let you get more powerful, and then you really shouldn't have a problem with those. So I just feel like specifically the gameplay, 3 is easily the best. It is the most enjoyable. It is the most complex and deep, but also not being too far, right? And so that's kind of those 3. I mean, the only other part I'd like to throw in terms of my own memory and my own experience is definitely tournament mode. Obviously in all of these games, and just so special. I don't know which tournament mode I thought of when I look back in my head about Dragon Ball, but I remember, sitting there. I normally sit on not anymore, but I used to sit on the floor when playing games for probably the first 20 plus years of my life. I'd sit on the floor, and I would just remember just the tournament. It's a simple thing, but I don't know. I liked how random it was, and I just liked the idea of not only who am I fighting against, but how are these other brackets gonna go, right? Who did the AI give me in this overall roster, and then who's beating who? I don't know why, but again, I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, when playing some of these games. It just, I don't know, it stood out to me. It felt kind of special, where it was this randomized events, an event in this game. And I don't know if I experienced something like that before Dragon. Maybe that's why. The kind of tournament style AI, let's pick the characters for you. We'll have them beat each other, and you'll meet them, further on in the bracket. I don't think I ever experienced something like that, so it just kind of felt cool to see a roster of players that were really cool. Let's throw some random matchups at you, and it's cool to envision those two fighting in a tournament setting, right? So those are present in all of them, and I played them in all of those games. Love it. I really, to end this video, the Budokai series is so good. It really is. It's better than I thought it was, and I already thought it was good. That is what got me into Dragon Ball in the first place. Now, I'm not a massive diehard fan. I haven't seen everything. I haven't played everything, but when I think of how I got into even liking Dragon Ball as an entity, it was the Budokai games. Now, eventually, I did play the Tenkaichi games as well, but specifically, these are the 3 games that I can remember pretty vividly, or at least, again, segments. What's the main thing that stood out? I can remember those for each of these 3 games. So I'm very glad I went back to play it. Hopefully it can help me out, when battling people in Spark. I highly doubt it, but hopefully I not have a leg up, but hopefully I'm familiar with how, some of the dodging and countering systems and whatnot. Hopefully I can kind of remember what I was doing in those 3 games to get ready for Sparking Zero. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on. I hope to see you all on the next one.